Okay, this little video is going to be over some steering components. We kind of had a issue with having to shorten everything up with the distance learning and had to shorten like a week or two of the steering and suspension course to get it done by the 15th when the governor wants it done. So anyway, some of the task sheets you're seeing sprinkled in week to week don't necessarily have to do with the chapter that week. I just want you to be sure and get the task sheet part of it done, and that way you get at least all that, and had to kind of pick which chapters or kind of prioritize them over others. So let's run through the steering real quick. This is on the 6500 that's outside. It'll be the same on the trucks that you're going to do the task sheets on. This one's just easier to see everything on because there's no engine and all the components are out of the way. So you've done your task sheets about the steering column and the steering shaft. So here you got your shaft coming down from the steering column. Already went over the U-joints having to be in phase and lined up in any parts. So if you'd hold one side of the yoke on this U-joint really tight, with your other hand grab the other side, and you're looking for movement in the U-joint itself. Also in your slip joint, you don't want any movement in it, or your pivot joint here. That has a lot of play in it there, so you might need to consider that when you're doing your inspections as to how much of that play that you have and what the service manual says you can have. But back to what we need to cover for the task sheets this week. Okay, this is your steering gear. Now it's a steering gearbox, but the slang term, and a lot of times even in the service manual, they leave the box part off and just call it a steering gear. So it can be manual or power. This one's power steering. Got your lines coming in here, but this output shaft of the gearbox has a pitman arm that connects to it. So the pitman arm is splined. It's normally indexed or has marks on it to line it up properly, because our goal is to have the steering wheel straight when the truck's driving down the road and not have it off center. That's kind of problematic and drives some people crazy when they drive them. Keeps your turn signals from canceling after you turn or negotiate a turn and whatnot. So pitman arm inspection, you want to make sure that there's no shiny here where it looks like it's been moving. Rust streaks coming out and running down is an indication that a fastener is loose. So just like on our wheel nuts, when we look for those rust streaks, the pitman arm is the same way. Or sometimes you can see movement where the washer has moved, telling you the nut's not tight. There is a torque spec on that, and you want to torque it down. We don't have the nut off of this one, but it's kind of hard to see in this video, but there is a mark right here that's been made at the factory. Looks almost like a chisel mark. There will be a mark a lot of times on the pitman arm itself, and you line those two up on the splines. That's how you index it when you install it. Always be sure you torque this to the proper specs, because if this comes off, you lose all steering on the truck, and there will be a bad accident at the end of that. Okay, so some pitman arms are indexed different ways with the marks. Some of them have a master spline. There's different ways, but the service manual will tell you how to put that on. I'll go over later on a different video the tools to service a bunch of this stuff, but for right now I'm just going through the components. So on the end of the pitman arm here, you're going to have a drag link that connects to that. So the drag link goes from the pitman arm down to the steering knuckle, which is attached to the driver's front wheel. So when the steering gear moves the pitman arm, it's going to move the drag link, which is going to move the driver's side front wheel. Some drag links are adjustable, some aren't. Most on the big trucks are not adjustable because it makes it a weak link when it has a adjuster sleeve in the middle. If it is adjustable, what it's adjustable for is to center the steering wheel. So once the steering or the tires are straight ahead, you would need to adjust the drag link to make the steering wheel straight, if that makes sense. So if I'm shorten this or lengthen it, it's going to move this pitman arm when the wheels are straight ahead, which is in turn going to rotate the steering shaft and the steering wheel that's on the end of it. So that would be how you would center the steering wheel. Now if all this is put together right with master splines and nothing is bent or out of whack, then the steering wheel should be straight. So there's two ways to do it, and different manufacturers do that differently. So it could be adjustable, could be solid. Most of ours are a solid drag link. Okay. So where the steering knuckle connects, well, right where the steering arm connects to the steering knuckle, sorry, You got your king pins, which is a pin that goes through the axle, has bushing on the top and bushing on the bottom, and that's what allows the wheel to pivot and be able to turn. Okay. You have a Ackerman arm, they call it a lot of times, but it comes off of the steering knuckle on the driver's side as well, and it comes out here, and then it has a ball joint here. This ball joint is called a Tyrod end, so it's a pivot as well. The Tyrod end connects to the tie rod, which is a long hollow tube that has internal threads. The tie rod has external threads. And on the other end we're fixing to go to, you'll see that there's a tie rod end there as well. One thing you got to remember is these are left-handed and right-handed threads. So one end of this is left-handed, one end is right. The reason we do that, to set the toe, which means this tire and the passenger side tire being the same distance, or there's a specification on that we actually want it towed in so that both tires are rolling straight down the road, basically when you're going down the highway. That's called toe, and that's one of our settings we're going to get into later for alignment. So that tie rod end being left and right-handed thread, if I turn the tube in the middle, or actually the tie rod, and it's left hand on one end, right hand on the other, then it's going to get longer or shorter depending on which way I turn that. So that's how I set the toe. I either make the tie rod longer or shorter, and it's going to control the distance between the tires at the rear versus the tires at the front, so that both tires are pointed straight down the road when I'm driving straight ahead. Okay, so remember, you need to mark that and put it back right, because if you turn it around backwards, it'll still adjust. It'll just go the opposite way to get shorter than it used to. But if somebody else comes along and orders a driver's side tie rod end, it may have the wrong threads on it because you turned the tie rod around and put it on backwards. So always mark that when you take it off. Once again, this is our tie rod coming over to the passenger side. It's got the same ball joint. These threads are opposite from the other side. So we got the same thing. We got an Ackerman arm here. What this tie rod does is makes the passenger side tire move with the driver's side tire. Those need to move together. Obviously, when you steer the truck, you got the same kingpin set up over here on the axle. We'll get into testing that later. When you're doing your inspection on these components, look here. This is a problem because students failed to put the cotter pin back in. So once this nut is tightened to the proper torque, the cotter pin has to be installed. There's a hole in the stud here, and whichever one of these castellated nut slots line up with that, a cotter pin has to go through and be bent to keep that from coming loose later. That's the kind of stuff you look for. That deadlines the truck. That would get you a ticket and put out of service if this was a commercial vehicle out on the road and DOT pulled it over. Other than that, just inspecting components for looseness. So the threads here can't be loose. You'd have to make sure the clamp here is tight, because after you adjust it, you tighten the clamp down and lock everything in place on either side so the toe doesn't move on you. That's pretty much the steering linkage.